someone that fell asleep at the graveyard shift in a plant 50 years ago and woke up and walked around and saw that, they'd be surprised, because those communities were so vibrant when 1.5 million people lived there, and now it's closer to 700,000. Those houses are gone now, so you'll find huge tracts of land that are open that still have paved roads but have no houses. It's a pretty big city geographically. Nearly all of it developed, so there were large manufacturing operations, but large residential communities as well. And over the last 20 or 30 years, because of the decline in population, a lot of the residential areas have gone away.
One of the problems Detroit has today is blocks and blocks of what looks like a war zone, just deserted houses and empty lots where there's, graffiti, and it's crazy. But it really begins with the loss of the automobile industry. It's not just making cars, it's making transmissions, it's making parts, it's hiring law firms that represent those companies, it's hiring the restaurants that are serving the workers, it's the schools that are employing teachers to teach the kids of the workers. Once you start to take away the demand for those goods, those factories are going to lay off workers.
It becomes sort of this downward spiral of less revenue means less services mean residents are less happy, they go someplace and live where the services are provided for them better.
Biggest thing was foreign competition. The Japanese imports in the 1970s really changed demand from a domestic car product to more of a foreign car product.
He was an innovator of his time, and he had a vision to create wealth for his employees, which is why he instituted a $5 a day pay.
Clearly, Detroit's more current roots are in the auto industry, right, with Henry Ford and General Motors and everybody else. And the auto industry really coming into fruition probably early 1900s when Ford Motor Company was founded. The Dodge brothers founded a car company as well. And that's what really started Detroit on its trajectory. A lot of automotive companies developed in Detroit, and a lot of that probably had due to the fact that they had access to waterways and access to a lot of raw materials. So a lot of the iron ore that they built cars with was mined in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They put it on freighters, bring it down to Detroit, and then they would turn that into steel and then turn that into cars. From the early 1900s to late 1950s, 1960s is when Detroit really took off. During the war, it was the arsenal of democracy, right? That's where we built a lot of the airplanes used in World War II. And so that led to the development of unions, which, the pendulum always swings too far. The unions were a good thing to try and help improve working conditions, get better wages, get better benefits for the employees. The downside was the unions became a monopoly labor supplier, which kind of held the companies hostage. So when that pendulum swings too far, the car companies look for better, cheaper ways to manufacture. And unfortunately, that meant a lot of jobs left. And that's why you see a lot of manufacturing done in Mexico now, or in China, or elsewhere.
But as the auto industry got into financial difficulty, they also had less revenue because the auto industry provided a lot of money to the city.
It was precipitated by an event. A black Vietnam vet had come back from the war. There was a party, and the police came and broke it up, and they arrested some folks. So the next day, some of the other local black residents felt that the guys that were arrested were treated unfairly. Of course, at that time, the police force was predominantly white. They went to the police station. It just progressed from there into, looting and burning buildings and things like that. And then eventually they brought in the National Guard to quell riots. That started white flight, white affluent city residents fleeing the city and moving to the suburbs where their safety was much, much better.
Pensions are obligations to workers in that community. And if you don't pay that pension, you decrease the confidence, and people simply won't want to live there or work there in that community.
So they have the legacy problems of pensions. So you used to have this big base of employees that all were public employees. They were all union employees. They were all given fairly rich pensions, right? You work 30 years, you can retire when you're 55. And that formula sort of worked, right? Because corporate America did that as well. That formula sort of worked when pensions were first set up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, because people didn't live as long. So if you let someone retire at 55 or 60 and they died when they were 72, you probably had enough money in the pension to pay them until they died at 72. Now they live another 10 or 15 years. And so the pressure that puts on the assets available to fund that pension become much greater. So that's why you're seeing so much negativity about public sector pensions in general. This bankruptcy has been 40 to 50 years in the making. So it's not the sort of thing, they'll flush through bankruptcy probably within a year or so, but it's going to take a long time to get the city back on a trajectory that it needs.
If a populace doesn't really trust their democratically elected leaders, or that the leaders have their best interest, the people simply are going to have an apathetic attitude towards their community.
The citizens of Detroit have kept electing corrupt officials for the last 30 or 40 years. So you can parallel that to folks in Illinois, right? 3 of the last 4 governors of Illinois are all in jail or have been in jail. His mom was a criminal, he's a criminal. Unfortunately, that's been the case with a lot of the leadership in Detroit. I mean, you declare bankruptcy for one reason: you run out of cash. Bankruptcy is a tool that businesses use, that when they get in trouble, they can write off some of the liabilities. So anybody that's the bondholders who have lent money to the city of Detroit, those guys will take a haircut. So if they lend them $100, maybe they only get $60 back, they can only get $30 back. But that frees up those liabilities. It's not like a company where you can just shut it down, close the doors, and be done. You can't close the city because you still have 700,000 people that are living.
Hell no. No. You hold on to those historical artifacts. You sell your history. I mean, what do you have when it's all over? You hold on to that because that's part of the identity of the community. You have to maintain that. If you lose that, you're really going to have a difficult time rebuilding.
It's a pretty cheap place to set up shop now. You can go in and buy a pretty decent building for a tiny fraction of what you would pay for anything close to that in Silicon Valley or in New York or in Chicago.